Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, we're going to talk about leadership and specifically team building events. So I'm sure like most of you, you've been to a team building event or maybe many, and they can inspire you if they're good events. But the problem with many of them is you're inspired for a day or two, three, and then you slowly forget and it just doesn't always stick. And it's not that maybe the event wasn't good or it wasn't interesting. It's just that it's momentary, right? And so the question becomes, how do you make it stick? And there was a comment I found online that was very interesting. And this gal says, I've been trying to figure out why some team building sessions actually work. How do they change how teams work together and others feel good for a day and then disappear? Lately, I've been watching and reading more about speakers who come from real high pressure environments instead of pure corporate backgrounds. One thing I keep noticing is how much storytelling plus shared struggle seems to matter more than activities or icebreakers. So interesting perspective. Dustin, you've been to and you've conducted a lot of team building events. Let's talk about how to get a message to actually stick.
I think it's an incredible question that if you've ever been a leader and you've ever tried to create one of these events, you know you've struggled with it. You know, one of the first things I always think about is it's very natural when people talk about the forgetting. There's actually this guy named Ebbinghaus. It's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve that actually scientifically proves that basically within 48 to 72 hours of having an event, people have forgotten like over 90% of what you've talked about. So I think that's just one important to recognize why. And what the forgetting curve talks about is that the best way to counteract that is essentially to have follow-up within 24 hours, reinforcing key points that you hit in that learning event, right? Whether it was a single day, multi-day, whatever. And every time you kind of reinforce it regularly, it basically reduces the forgetting, right? Which you don't need a forgetting curve to really understand what that means. It kind of makes sense. Like, oh, well, yeah, if you continue to reinforce it. But what I think is interesting about just thinking of it through that lens is instinctively we know that, you know, you said it right in your introduction. What happens? Everyone just forgets. So I always think that there's kind of two sides of this. I think one is understanding the forgetting curve. And so what are you doing after said event to reinforce whatever it is you're trying to accomplish or whatever, you know, whether it's training or culture or whatever, what are the things you're doing shortly thereafter? But I think a lot of times actually the problem isn't in just the after, it's actually in the before. And what I mean by that is I think so often when people are planning these events, they way over believe the impact that event can have. So I'll give an example that I did for a while. So in my previous role, I was our head of sales. And when I was our head of sales, I was in charge of kind of creating and facilitating our sales kickoff every year, which was a kind of a 2-day event, you know, one overnight. And when I first started, we had no real corporate training. A lot of our sales team, like this was kind of the 2 days they got almost all of their training. We'd have a couple of sales meetings throughout the year, but it wasn't really heavy training. And so my kind of naive thinking was I tried to jam so much training and so much knowledge transfer into 2 days where, I would prepare for months in advance and I would share all of this information. And after the first year or two of doing it, I realized that every time I did it, no one remembered anything. Nothing changed. I felt great about it because I was super prepared and I felt like I was sharing a lot of great information, but it really didn't move the needle at all. Now, partially also because there was no reinforcement, but you know, the other part was my goal was completely wrong. So if my goal was behavior change, training, you know, knowledge transfer, well, we know in order to train any human how to do anything, new behavior or knowledge transfer, it takes more than one shot. So if I would have just boiled it down to like, what am I even trying to accomplish? I would have never done that. And so fast forward after a few years, what I basically realized was, candidly, when I actually kind of came across this forgetting curve and just kind of got the wind knocked out of me a little bit, I took a step back and said, well, what is it actually I'm trying to accomplish in this 2-day kickoff with our sales team? Well, it actually had nothing to do with knowledge transfer. It had nothing to do with training. If I needed to do those things, I could do those 100 other ways with much higher outcomes. What I really wanted was for the people, the age old quote, people will, forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Right. And so to me, what that entire then 2 days became was, what was my entire goal? It had nothing to do with knowledge transfer and training. It had everything to do with, I wanted the team to feel something. And I wanted them to feel like when they walked out of there the second day, that they loved being part of the team. They thought very highly of their team members, and they had the tools and resources to go win. Like, if they had those three things, then it was successful. If they didn't remember a single other thing, but they just felt that, I knew that would carry us forward. And 10 years of doing it now since then, that still is our, and we recenter ourselves every year. It's like, okay, but what is our goal? If this is our goal, what does that mean? And again, that doesn't mean you can't do any sort of training or knowledge transfer in a thing like that. But like, as an example, in our last sales kickoff, just, a few weeks ago, there was one training on one thing that we reiterated several times over the 2 days. And we had been talking about it and training on some of it over the last year, and we'll continue to do it over the next year. So it really wasn't a single launch point or this is our one shot and everyone's going to remember. It was like, hey, this is just part of the journey. And since we're together, let's use our time together to just advance ourselves a little bit faster in this category.
Yeah. One thing I heard you say was you have to simplify it. And I've always said that you have to almost make it so easy there's no excuses, which when I hear you talk about this, I hearken back to coaching, and you and I both have a lot of youth coaching experience. But specifically 2 days ago, I was coaching my daughter's fifth grade basketball team, and we were trying to install some plays. And we have 5 inbounds, baseline out of bounds plays, which they really only have about 4 of them down, even though we've been practicing for about a month. And we now have 4 regular offensive plays. And I noticed throughout the practice, they seemed squirrely, not engaged. And I said, what's going on? And they basically said, it's too much. I can't remember all of those. And I thought, well, most of you are about 11 years old. We've practiced this now a couple times. And they said, it's too much. And I thought, how could it be too much? It's 5 plays. We have very simple names. I've associated the names with the actions of what we're doing. We go over it and over it and over it. We put people in different roles so they can learn all of the roles to help them better remember. And then after practice had concluded and the girls had walked out, my assistant coach and I had talked and said something along the lines of, maybe we just need 2 plays. And then the light bulb went off was, yes, you're right. And much like with our baseline out of bounds plays, we don't practice them every day. So if we don't practice them at every practice, why would why should I expect them to know them? Because again, if you're not reinforcing, if you go long periods of time without discussing, without walking through them, you should expect them to forget, especially at this age. And so I think a couple of things is one, when you're talking about a leadership event, on-site, off-site, any kind of thing like this, is you have to kind of distill it down to what is our objective. And more specifically, 1 or 2 objectives. You said really just a moment ago that you did a training about one thing, about one thing. I love that idea because, again, it makes it so easy. There's no excuses. And I think if you want something to stick, you have to simplify it. But I'm going to give you one more example is you and I did an offsite leadership event with a local company. And we had the opportunity to sit in and listen and learn, really get to know these individuals on this team. And when we started, we also made it personal. We got to understand what is it that these individuals really want, which was a big part of our workshop. Getting to ask those questions in advance helped us be able to make it personal, make it impactful, because when it's about you, you start to listen more. It hits home. And it sticks with you. I would also say that if I'm going to be doing any of this, I think all of that's important, but also you need engagement. And so for me, engagement means if I'm expected to remember something or implement these things, I need to be taking notes. And so whether you are the person who's leading this or part of the team who's leading it, we need to ensure that there is documentation, whether we're doing the process on the whiteboard with sticky notes, whether people are engaged in taking notes. If there's assignments and there's items within the workshop where I have to document, I think it's important because then I can write down how these things are relevant to me. And then you also said it, so I won't double down on it, but the follow up is whether it's one or two things we're trying to teach, we're trying to inspire, or skills and tactics we're trying to get people to use. How are we going to talk about these things and make them relevant each and every week? And I think part of it too, and we talked about this recently, is modeling. As a leader, I need to be the one modeling these behaviors and these tactics, because if I'm not, there is no trickle down effect. And I know that gets glazed over a lot, but I think it's really important to start from the basis. What is the one or two objectives we want out of this? And if there is more than that, I just don't know how it's going to be effective, because how many things can you expect people to walk away from or implement after an event? I don't care if it's an all-day event or a 3-day event.
Yeah. Yeah. I think your point of, when people think about the follow-up, I think a lot of times people think that they need to have like another event, or an email or whatever. And you can really do whatever. I mean, you don't need another event. Certainly, you can certainly follow up with an event. Some of it is actually just giving materials and really just having a very intentional conversation about what is the action that you're going to have after this. And then, again, I think depending on what your goal is, your goal is behavior change. Behavior change is hard. It's going to take a lot of repetition, to your point. And so I think kind of all that ties together. I think I've also thought about why is it that, the reason this is a topic is because it is a common problem that just about every organization faces when they have these things. And part of the reason I think that that's true is they're expensive, right? So like by definition, when you're paying, whether it's overnight or it's not, right, to pay for a venue, to, have a section of your team, frankly, non-productive hours, right, to be doing something somewhere else off-site, the preparation, the planning. And so there's just this, I feel like there's such a high bar that what people are trying to do is, and I know certainly I did this, when we first had our sales kickoff, we had never had a sales kickoff. And so to carve out, at that time, I think it was maybe like $10,000 or something like that for our team to go do that, which, today it's different, right? It's a lot larger than that. But at that time, man, $10,000 could have been $1 million, and I remember just thinking through like, we had to kind of scrape and claw to think through like, okay, well, if we're going to spend $10,000 on this 2-day thing, which, that was the hard cost, mind you. On top of that, we had the soft costs of our entire sales team basically being out of production for 2 days. Right. It's just, and so it became this hyper expensive bar. And so because of that, I felt like I needed to solve 7 problems to possibly have the value in those 2 days to overcome the cost. And while certainly you need to still have that analysis, we still do today. But what's different about it is what you start to realize is the age-old adage, less is more. When you actually try to solve 7 different problems, you end up solving none. And then the entire cost is kind of just a waste. Versus if we look at it, and so if I look at, our, not just our sales kickoff, but any event that we have where we're getting a collection of team members together, depending on what the goal is, if you get really clear on what the goal is, it actually is usually pretty obvious how you could accomplish that. And then it's really just a question of like, okay, if I accomplish this goal and this is the most effective way to do it, what value will that create? And then is it worth it or not? Right. And if it's not, well, then, yeah, you either need to change your goal or you need to change the event or the outcomes, right? But if you can figure out that this is kind of what the expense is and this is what I think the outcome is and this is the ROI, then it becomes really clear. But I think a lot of times, so when you're starting an event, I think there's a high pressure. I think if an event has happened a lot, I think people really get complacent with it. It's really easy just to say, well, this is how we do it because this is how we've done it. And maybe with the best intentions. I'll use myself. So I ran the sales kickoff for a while. And then about 7 years ago or so, we hired a head of sales. Well, he took over that event. Well, the first year, I had already made a lot of the changes I mentioned, right? But it still was, it was completely my lens on it, right? It was like, this is what it was. And all of a sudden he came in with a very new perspective, which was very good. But what was interesting about it is the first year, I kind of said like, okay, but we need to do this. Okay, but what about this and what about that, right? And then, over time, we changed it and he brought some really good ideas and we edited it from there. And so, we're now, years later, it's so much better. But I think part of the reason it's better is one, I thought we've just learned to adapt. But I think two, not only has he brought good ideas, both he and I have asked a tremendous amount of feedback each and every year, right? So, and not feedback by like just a survey, right? I think a lot of times people send a survey after these things. Well, what do you get from a survey is you get basically, for the most part, you get people that want to be negative and want to say the negative stuff about it. Most people, if they're positive, don't actually respond to like a conference survey or something like that. So then you're not really understanding and you can throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we really try to kind of do more one-to-one conversations about, okay, how was this? What worked? What didn't? What did you like? What did you not like? Right. And because then you kind of get a real feeling for it. And then we just track, okay, what are the next few changes we're going to make for next year?
I love that. You kind of stole my thunder a little bit there with the feedback one, but I'll pose it a little bit differently. I think that feedback is critical, but a lot of times the leaders or the owners don't always have the feedback. They have what they think they need that needs to be improved. And if there are multiple layers between yourself and entry level or maybe some levels of the team, you may not have the answers. And so if you're going to put together a leadership event that focuses on what you think, it's probable it won't fully resonate. And so to get that feedback, I think it's really helpful to either do it in person in a group so that you're not getting the negative or the woe is me or, things about benefits and pay or whatever it might be. I think it's important to have almost like a pre-leadership session where you're breaking down organizational issues. You're breaking down items that are going to be important to putting this together, because ultimately, if it's relevant to them, if they believe that these things need to be improved upon, or these are the core nuances of what's going to help us get from A to B and B to C, they're going to show up engaged. They're going to feel like their voice was heard. And that's where I think this sitting in a chair all day long at sitting in an event for 2 days becomes a little bit more exciting for me as an employee, because I feel like you heard me. Now we're going to talk about the things that our team says, yes, this is where we can get to where we want to go. We are coalesced, because I've seen it both ways. And sometimes getting out of the office for a day or 2 days to do these offsite meetings can be fun. But other times it's like, okay, well, how much am I going to have to take in and what's expected for me after this? And then it's like, you ask me about the event 3 days later and it just went in this year and out the other. And you should be feeling extrinsically motivated walking away from these events. And I think that's just one of many ways to make them impactful for days and hopefully months to come.
Just to add to that, I think it's when you set the objective and you build the entire program around the objective, I think sometimes leaders forget to share the objective. And so it's almost like it's supposed to be this secret thing versus, to your point, as a participant, it's really easy to think the objective is different. Right. So if you show up for a 2-day and I, as the leader, my objective is basically to coalesce the team and have them feel really good by the time they walk out in day 2. But you as a participant are showing up and like, I want to learn how to sell better. If our objectives are not matched, you're exactly right. You're going to walk out of there saying, well, this was awful. This didn't, I've been to a sales kickoff at a different company and I love that one better because of this. Right. And so sometimes when people are giving feedback, it's not wrong because it's their feedback. Right. But if you're clear on what the objective is, the feedback you're going to get is going to be so much better, because if you're kicking off saying, look, here's the three things we want to accomplish in the next 2 days. And they know that, and they see that. They may disagree with it. That's another feedback point, right? But at least they know that the decisions that were made are aligned with that goal, because again, everyone kind of shows up to these things with lots of, and It's one thing if you've had the event a number of times. When you've never had that event before, no one knows why they're there, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to figure out, well, what do we do? What are we going to do today? And not like, when do I talk? When do I not talk? What is fair game here? What is not? What are we actually trying to accomplish? And so, getting just super, super clear on what that day or hours or, a couple of days is the objective is, and what it has been built for and structured for, so that then people can get their mind around, okay, this is why we're here. This is what I'm focused on. Okay, I'm going to be focused on connecting with the team because that's what's most important. Or I'm going to be focused on taking notes on little behavior changes I can make to become better at X.
Yeah, I'm going to say something that might not be as popular with some folks, but I think it's really good to get participation. And I don't mean engagement. I mean getting people up out of their seats to lead a segment of an event. Now, it's not always something where you need to prepare for in advance. It's you leading a Q&A. It's you coming up to write some stuff down on the board for a section of the event. But getting people to participate not only makes them feel heard, makes them feel valued, but gets them out of their seat. People participating is really important. Otherwise, the optics and the way people feel are really important. Yeah. And the thing you don't want is people feeling like they were talked at all day.
Yes.
So I go back to marketing a lot, but so often does your message make people feel something? Feel an emotion, feel a thought? Is it thought-provoking? Those are all good things, but if all it is talking at people, presenting, instructing, that just gets very old very quickly. And in an age today where we live in, where people all joke about having ADHD, I just can't expect for that to be a very productive or very successful event. So from the beginning, find ways to get engagement, or more importantly, participation. And it doesn't always mean you're asking for volunteers, you're picking volunteers. And I just think that makes it more fun. And if it's fun, you're engaged. And if it's engaged or engaging, it sticks.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Completely agree. Yeah. I think, so my kind of put a bow on this from my lens, I think starting with an objective, getting really clear on that, thinking about, what you can do after to reinforce. And I think the other piece that I think can also be added to this, right, is there anything in advance? Because if you have a clear objective, is there any sort of pre-event stuff that you can do to start that process? Again, whatever your objective is, to then reinforce while you're there, to then on the back end. And so again, depending on your goal, that's going to change. But to more look at these events as, think of it more like a bell curve of I'm preparing, and there is a bit of crescendo while you're at an event, and it certainly can tail off from there, but it shouldn't be a cliff. It shouldn't be a single event start, single event cliff. It should be more of a bell curve that's smoothed out, with that maybe being the highlight in between.
Yeah, so I think the more we talk about this, the more I've come to realize there is no one thing or two things. It's really a process of getting started, planning, making sure that these topics are relevant, distilling it down to one, maybe two main objectives, and continue to iterate each time you have one. There's really no right or wrong answer. I'm sure that there are a lot of other ways that you can do this very successfully. And if you have any thoughts or comments, share them with us, please. Put them in the comments section below. We'd love to hear it. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.